My name is Autumn Cleland, and I'm 32 years old. Everything was in place. The reference letters, the portfolio, the interview confirmation, all of it sitting neatly in a folder on my desktop, printed and backed up twice because I am exactly that kind of person. The offer from the Vancouver architecture firm had come after 14 months of applications, rejections, and one round of interviews that I had replayed in my head so many times I could recite the questions in the shower. I had driven across 2 provinces for that final interview. I had borrowed my neighbor's blazer because mine had a coffee stain I couldn't get out, and I wasn't about to buy a new one when I still had 3 months left on my car loan. I got the call on a Tuesday afternoon while I was on my lunch break, standing in the parking lot of the hardware store where I had been working since I was 24. They offered me the position. I sat on the hood of my car and cried in a way that surprised even me. Happy crying, the kind that comes out sideways and won't stop. I called no one. I just sat there and let it happen. The firm was based in Vancouver. I was in Sudbury. That distance was not a small thing, and I knew it going in. My husband and I had talked about it. I want to be honest about that. We had talked about it. He said he was supportive. He said he thought it was time. He said the right things, the way people do when they want to believe they mean them. We had been together since I was 26. 6 years. We got married in the backyard of his parents' place in Espanola on a September afternoon that was cool and golden and genuinely one of the best days of my life. I believed in him. I believed in us. And I want to say that clearly before I say everything else, because none of what happened later was something I saw coming, and I think that matters. The job was set to start September 9th. I had 8 weeks to give notice, wrap up at the hardware store, find temporary housing in Vancouver while we figured out the longer plan, and get myself there. 8 weeks sounds like a lot until you're living inside them. My mother-in-law called me on a Wednesday evening, 3 days after I told the family about the offer. I was on the couch with my laptop open, looking at sublets in East Van. She said she was proud of me. She said she knew how hard I had worked. She said all of it warmly, and I thanked her and meant it. That conversation lasted maybe 12 minutes. It was the last easy conversation I would have with her for a long time. The first thing I noticed was that my husband stopped asking about the move. He had been involved at first, looking at neighborhoods, wondering aloud about job transfers for himself, asking whether we should ship the car or drive it out together. Then one week he just stopped. I assumed it was stress. I filled in the silence with excuses the way I always had, the way you do when you love someone, and don't want to look at what you're actually seeing. Then the email didn't arrive. The firm had told me they would send the formal offer package, the contract, the benefits breakdown, the start date confirmation, within 10 business days of my verbal acceptance. I had checked my inbox every morning. Day 10 came and went. Day 12. Day 15. I emailed my contact at the firm, a woman named Deborah in HR, and asked whether there was a delay on their end. She wrote back the same afternoon and said the package had been sent on day 8. She confirmed the email address they had on file. It was not my email address. It was close. 1 letter off. My middle initial inserted where it shouldn't have been. I had never given them that address. I don't have an address with my middle initial. I have never set one up. I asked Deborah to resend to my correct address and she did, right away, no issue. The contract arrived within the hour. I opened it, read through it, and then I sat very still for a moment because something had been chewing at me since the moment she confirmed the wrong address and I needed to sit with it. I had filled out my contact information on the application portal myself. I had triple-checked it. That email address was correct when I submitted it. Someone had changed it. I didn't say anything that night. I made dinner, I watched television, I went to bed. I lay in the dark and thought about who had access to my laptop. My husband did. I had never had a reason to lock it. I had never had a reason not to. The next morning, I pulled up the browser history on my laptop before he was awake. I wasn't even fully sure what I was looking for. What I found was a login to the firm's application portal from a date 3 days after I had accepted the offer verbally. I had not logged into that portal since the interview. My husband had. I closed the laptop. I went to the bathroom, I turned on the shower, and I stood under the water for a long time without doing anything, just standing there, because I didn't know what to do with what I had found, and I needed a few minutes to be somewhere loud enough to drown out my own thoughts. I did not confront him that morning. I needed to think. I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with before I said a word, because I had spent enough time in my life reacting to things before I understood them, and I was not going to do that here. Not with this. The job. My job. He had tried to delay it. Maybe more than that. He had logged into a portal I had applied through, using my credentials, which he could only have gotten by going through my saved passwords, and changed my contact email so that the formal offer package would go to an address I'd never see. If Deborah hadn't responded so quickly when I followed up, if I hadn't followed up at all, I might have assumed the offer had been rescinded. I might have spent weeks thinking I had lost it. And by then the start date might have passed. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about the fact that he hadn't said stop. He hadn't asked me not to go. He had sat across from me at dinner and asked whether I wanted to ship the car or drive it out together, and then quietly, while I was at work, he had tried to make the whole thing disappear. 3 days later, I made an appointment with a legal advisor at the local community law clinic. I told the woman at the front desk it was about a workplace matter, which was close enough to true that I didn't feel bad about it. I needed to understand whether what my husband had done constituted anything beyond a betrayal, whether there were actual legal implications. The advisor I met with was a calm, methodical woman who listened to everything I said without interrupting once. When I finished, she took a breath and explained that unauthorized access to someone's online account, even a spouse's, even using a password they had access to, is a criminal offense under the Criminal Code of Canada. Section 342.1. She said that altering someone's account information to interfere with their employment opportunities could also carry civil liability. She asked me if I had documentation. I had the browser history screenshotted. I had Deborah's email confirming the address on file and when the package had been sent. She looked at them carefully and told me I had a clear paper trail. I thanked her and left. I sat in my car in the parking lot and stared at the windshield for probably 5 minutes. I wasn't crying. I was past crying at that point. I was just trying to absorb the shape of a thing I had loved being the thing that had done this to me. I drove home. I walked in. My husband was in the kitchen making coffee. He asked how my day was. I told him it was fine. I sat down at the kitchen table and I watched him move around the kitchen, and I thought about the fact that I had been sleeping next to someone who had done this and smiled at me every morning since. I didn't say anything that night either, or the next night. I needed one more thing before I was ready to talk. I called his mother. I know how that sounds. But here is the thing. I had always known, in the way you know things you don't want to examine too closely, that she was the center of gravity in that family. Every decision my husband made ran through her in some form. Not overtly. She was not a loud woman, not a dramatic one. She operated quietly, the way water operates. You don't notice it until it has worn through something. I called her and I asked her, as directly and as calmly as I could manage, whether she had said anything to my husband about the Vancouver job. Whether there had been a conversation I didn't know about. There was a pause that lasted long enough to tell me everything. She said she had mentioned to him that she was worried. She said she didn't think I had really thought through what the distance would mean for our marriage. She said she loved me and only wanted what was best for both of us. She said some things that were soft and considered and probably even partly true, and underneath all of it was the simple fact that she had sat down with her son and told him his wife leaving for Vancouver was a problem, and her son had decided to solve it without telling me. I said very quietly that I appreciated her honesty, and I ended the call. That evening after dinner, I asked my husband to sit down at the kitchen table. He looked at me with the kind of expression people have when they suspect what's coming, but haven't committed to knowing it yet. I slid my phone across the table and showed him the screenshot of the browser history. I told him what I knew. I told him I had spoken to a legal advisor. I told him I knew his mother had spoken to him. I told him all of it without raising my voice, which was one of the harder things I have ever done. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said he panicked. He said he didn't know what he was doing. He said he hadn't thought it through. He said he just didn't want me to go. I told him that I understood he didn't want me to go. And I told him that none of that was a reason, he cried. I want to be honest about that too, he cried. And it was real, and part of me wanted to reach across the table and tell him it was okay the way I always had. But I didn't, because it was not okay. And I think somewhere in that moment I understood that the habit of reaching across tables to make things okay for other people had cost me more than I had ever sat down and counted. I left for a friend's place that night. My friend Nadia had been asking me for 2 weeks if something was wrong, and I had kept saying no. I showed up at her door at 9:30 with one bag, and she opened it without asking a single question, which is the thing about having a truly good friend. The following morning, I called Deborah at the firm and explained that I had experienced a personal situation that had caused a communication delay on my end, and asked whether my start date could be pushed back 3 weeks to give me time to sort out housing properly. She was gracious. She said that was absolutely manageable. I booked a one-way flight to Vancouver for 3 weeks out. I spent those 3 weeks doing practical things that I will not make dramatic because they were not dramatic. They were just necessary. I opened a new bank account at a branch my husband didn't know I used. I contacted the firm's HR to ensure all of my employment documents, payslips, and communications would go to my personal email and no other address. I arranged temporary housing through a contact at my old university. I called a family lawyer, a real one this time, not a legal aid clinic, and had a conversation about what separating from a spouse in Ontario looks like and what my options were. My mother-in-law called me twice during those weeks. I let it go to voicemail both times. I listened to the messages. They were concerned. They were apologetic in the way that stops just short of acknowledging what actually happened. They asked me to come to Sunday dinner. I did not go. On the day I left, I got up before sunrise and finished packing the last of what I was taking. I had arranged for a colleague of my husband's to store the rest of my things temporarily. He was a decent man and didn't ask questions, and I was grateful for that. I called a cab from outside the house because I didn't want my husband to see me order it on my phone and have one of those moments where he tries to stop me in the driveway. He was awake when I came downstairs. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and he looked like he had not slept. He didn't try to stop me. He said my name once, quietly. I looked at him. I told him I hoped he figured out what he was actually afraid of, because it was not me leaving, it was something older than that. He knew what I meant. I could see that he did. I walked out the front door and got in the cab, and I did not look back at the house. I got to Pearson with enough time to sit down and eat something before the gate opened, which felt like a small luxury after weeks of running on logistics and adrenaline. I went through security. I had my carry-on over one shoulder and my laptop bag over the other and my boarding pass on my phone, and when I got to the gate, I found a seat and exhaled for what felt like the first time in 3 weeks. The flight to Vancouver was 4 hours and 50 minutes. I had a window seat. Somewhere over the Rockies, I looked down at the mountains and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but something that was space. Room. The feeling of being in motion toward something rather than standing still while something was taken from you. I landed at YVR on a Friday evening. The mountains were visible from the terminal in that particular way they are at dusk, clear and enormous, and so close it doesn't seem real if you're not used to it. I took the Canada Line into the city. I found my temporary apartment in Mount Pleasant, on a street lined with old maple trees and houses with wide front porches. I dropped my bags inside the door, opened the window, and sat on the floor for a few minutes, just listening to the city outside. The firm was everything I had hoped it would be. The work was hard in the right way. My colleagues were sharp and generous with their knowledge in the way that good teams are. I was given a project within my first month that actually challenged me, actually made me think, actually required me to be better than I had been. I had not felt that in a long time. I have been in Vancouver for 18 months now. I have a permanent apartment, 2 blocks from the one I started in. I have colleagues who have become friends. I have a Saturday morning routine that involves a farmer's market on Main Street and coffee from a place so small it only fits 8 people, which suits me fine. My husband and I finalized our separation 7 months ago. It was not easy, and I will not pretend it was. 14 months of paperwork and mediation and conversations that left me wrung out and flat on my couch. But it is done. He kept the house. I kept everything that was actually mine, my work, my name, my direction. My mother-in-law and I have not spoken since the voicemail she left me during those 3 weeks. I made that decision clearly, and I have not second-guessed it. There is a kind of peace that comes not from resolution but from clarity. From finally understanding the difference between a relationship that is complicated and a relationship that is simply asking too much of you in exchange for too little. I want to say one thing about what my husband did, because I think about it differently now than I did in those first weeks. I don't think he is a bad person. I think he is a frightened one. I think he sat with his fear and his mother's worry, and he chose the easiest solution he could find, which was to make my opportunity disappear quietly so that no one would have to have a hard conversation. I think he genuinely did not calculate what it would cost me. Not because he didn't care, but because he had never had to think about what it costs someone when you quietly rearrange their life without asking. That is its own kind of damage, and it is real regardless of the intention behind it. I saved for 14 months and worked across 2 provinces to build a career that was mine. My husband tried to delete it from my inbox so I would stay. And I left anyway. I built the life I had been building toward, and I live inside it now. And it is imperfect and genuinely hard sometimes, and entirely, completely mine. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. Because every week we bring you real stories about the moment someone decided enough, and what happened after they did.